From years of anxiety to warrior and mentor, Bradley Robinson created the Anxiety Project to help you end your anxiety naturally. Let's mold the new you and let's end anxiety together.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Anxiety Project podcast. Welcome to 293 friends. Here we are. We're here to talk about sacrifice in the biblical stories and what this means from a psychological perspective, because sacrifice is so fundamental. It's so fundamental. We make sacrifices every day because we know that there's us in the future. We know that there's us tomorrow. We know that there's us a week from now, a year from now. But it's not, we we know that it's around the corner because you hear people, "Oh, live for the moment, you only live once." These mottos that I detest. I don't like them whatsoever because we need to make sacrifices so that our future selves can thrive. That's why I'm very strict about my own diet, because I noticed when I would introduce foods I know would make me a little anxious or make me a little drowsy, I would get the hint. It's not worth it. For that minute of pleasure, it's not worth the days, like literally days of feeling the effects of eating the foods I know I shouldn't be eating. So I'm very strict about that because I'm sacrificing instant gratification now for my future self to be energized and awake and alert and think clearly. And it's worth the sacrifice. So we're going to talk about that today. And we're going to talk about the significance of Christ's sacrifice on the crucifix, because that's such a symbol in our culture. And we've known that symbol throughout, well, not just our lives, but for how many thousands of years. So that's going to be great. That's going to be really interesting. And I'm reading a book currently called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Great book. And I love how he talked about God and religion in this book, because he was talking about instinct. He's talking about an underlying morality. And I love his metaphor. He says this morality, these instincts, God is hard as nails, hard as nails. And what he was saying here is, well, it's the voice of your conscience that is telling you that you're steering off the path, and it's generating that feeling, that insecure feeling, that shame and guilt. And it's hard as nails because it's nature. It's something that we don't have control over. It's there. It's present in our lives. We know, we hear that voice. We feel that presence of God. We know that it's there. And many people, like my older self, would ignore it, would not recognize it, but it was always there. I'm going to really dive into that because, you could continue to walk down a path and not recognize that voice, but, the voice becomes silent, but you wind up in hell, and things will get worse before it gets better. That's for sure. Because if you continue down a certain path that from the very beginning, it's those steps. Because the very beginning of, like me watching pornography when I was really young, from the very beginning, the voice told me no, and I would have the feelings of shame and guilt. But then the more I would engage in pornography, the steps towards this the repetition of this habit would slowly dim the lights on the voice. But as a consequence, as years go by, get greater and greater, because erectile dysfunction, not feeling fully satisfied with real women, and always being irritable, being super hyper in my sexual cues around other women in public, very sensitive, and also social anxiety around talking to real women as well would come about. So sacrifice is fundamental for for living a spiritual and anxious free life, hard life, to and I mean hard in the Goggin sense, to be tough, tough as nails. So what makes Christ's crucifixion so significant? Why? What is about it? Well, look at it this way. The worst thing happened to the person that least deserves it, to the Holy One, to one that speaks truth. And we see Christ like figures today in our society. I don't know if you follow people like, I don't know, Alex Jones or Russell Brand or David Goggins, Wim Hof, Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray, Joe Rogan. Many of these people, they speak the truth. And look what happens to them in the media. They get attacked, they get criticized. Big pharma comes after them, government comes after them, big media corporations come after them, big food corporations come after them. And so, Christ's story is similar to these types of people, or rather, the other way around. These types of people are similar to Christ's narrative, where you speak the truth, you speak the gospel, you awaken people. The government doesn't like that. These corporations, they don't like that. They want you to remain unconscious and consume and be obedient. And look what happened to Christ. They came after him because he was this person that they couldn't control. They couldn't, and he was awakening people to truth and the magic of their potential. And speaking of magic, Harry Potter is a Christ-like figure. And in the Order of the Phoenix, we see something similar happen to Harry, and not just Order of the Phoenix, but throughout all the books. But Order of the Phoenix, I really, really like, because in that book, so many terrible things happen to Harry, and he's that person that least deserves it. He's the chosen one. He's the chosen one. Everything bad happens to him. I mean, the school, Dumbledore leaves, the person that Harry leans on, God the Father, leaves the school, turns into a tyranny. His relationship with Cho Chang goes down the drain in a very terrible way. He gets tortured by Professor Umbridge. His uncle, he gets closer to his godfather, Sirius Black, and then he passes away at the end of the book. And not only that, though, there are so many. Oh yeah, he's having severe nightmares of Voldemort, and there's one particular nightmare where he was the snake biting Mr. Weasley, and then that whole thing of contending with that shadow element of his psyche. And then dealing with Professor Snape being taught under him occlumency. So it's just one terrible thing after another. And when I'm reading that book, I can relate to Harry. It's like no matter what, Harry continues to pursue and be persistent and to work through all of these difficult challenges. And that's what makes Christ's story archetypal. That's what makes Harry Potter the story archetypal, is because you see yourself in them. And what resonates with us is how they transcend suffering, that they can get hit by a brick wall over and over and over again and continue and to be persistent and to remain in character, remain morally sound. And that's the book of Job. That's the book of Job. I love this book because Job is maintaining faith in the midst of extreme suffering, because God makes a bet with the devil, because the devil's like, hey man, like let me have at Job. I know he's the most awakened and faithful of all people, and I bet you I can break him. And God's like, well, have at him. He's going to remain faithful. God had so much faith in Job, and Job keeps his faith even when all of his friends turn on him. He's sitting around a campfire with boils, and he's scraping his his rotting skin with shards of pottery, and he's just in, like, everything terrible happens to him. I think his children pass away at the beginning of the book, and he loses everything, right? And he still holds up his faith. And I see, when I listen to David Goggins, his perspective is similar to that of Job's, because no matter what life throws his way, Goggins views it as a test to one's character rather than being a victim, rather than throwing those victim cards everywhere. It's a test to one's character. That's what Viktor Frankl was talking about in Man's Search for Meaning. Those people who managed to live the longest in the concentration camps, if they weren't sent to the gas chambers and tortured to death, they were the ones that had this overarching vision of this being some sort of test of one's character, one's faith. Instead of having hopes that, I'm going to be saved one day by the military. They're going to come by Christmas. And a lot of people held on to that. And by Christmas, when nobody showed up to save them, a lot of them died from just despair. They lost all hope. They lost all meaning. But what Goggins is seeing when things are thrown his way that are very challenging, he sees this as it's a test of one's character. And I've placed certain, what would you say, behaviors that I used to incorporate, they used to act out. I placed certain behaviors in categories. So like pornography, I placed pornography in the category of hedonism, pleasure island, right? That's like, pleasure island is the meta category. It's the meta representation of hedonism, pleasure island. And I told myself, I don't want to be king of the losers. I don't want to be on pleasure island, because when you look at Pinocchio is a great image of that place where they turn into jackasses, right? Pinocchio's on pleasure island. He's engaging in junk foods. He's smashing church windows. He's smoking cigars and playing pool with delinquents. And he notices in the mirror, he's growing a tail. He's growing ears, right? He notices, he becomes awake to it. But what happens to Lampwick is Lampwick remains willfully blind. And when you remain willfully blind, you are more likely, and you certainly will, depending on how long you stay willfully blind, will turn into a jackass. You will turn into a braying donkey, right? It's like the Pan. Pan is the Greek god of mischief. Pan is half man, right? He's literally half man. And so regressing into a donkey-like form is like becoming not even human anymore. You're just a slave, because donkeys are slave animals, right? They just carry around materials for their owners. They work on farms, right? They're just slave animals, and that's what Lampwick turns into. But Pinocchio catches that early on. He's awakened, and I was awakened. I remember looking in the mirror one day, and I was just like, "Look at yourself, Brad. Look what you're doing in your life. You're pathetic. You're wasting so much time. You're watching too much pornography. You're drinking too much beers with your friends, and you're wasting so much time avoiding work and responsibilities, and you're smoking pot, and you're pursuing like hedonic pursuits. What are you doing? You don't feel like you're on the path. And I was getting more anxious and depressed. And so that's what I was talking about earlier with the conscience guiding us, right? It was just becoming more self-evident. It was just that internal feeling. And the despair was the orientation mechanism out, right? Like it was the suffering that I had no other choice, because everything that I was holding on to wasn't working. I was falling more into despair. So, what happens when things aren't working? You have to sacrifice them in order for take that leap of faith, in order for maybe things will be better. Well, you have no other choice, right? If what you're doing now is not working, you only have another place to go. It's in the unknown, the place you haven't walked yet, traversed yet. You have to take a leap of faith. You have to find meaning in the unknown. And so you pursue self-gratifying whims at your own peril, for you will end up worshiping the finite. It's not going to fulfill you. It's definitely not going to do that. And C.S. Lewis, he referred to Christianity as these instincts, okay? Instincts that guide us to what's best. And certainly we are guided towards hours of video games. We're certainly guided in that direction, pornography, social media. But if that is truly your God, if that is your God of choice, then surely it will be the answer to all problems. But it will not be. And you will know. You'll know. You'll feel irritable. You won't feel satisfied. You won't feel at peace. God is the voice of conscience that calls you out, not only on your inadequacies, but it calls you to adventure outside of your safe space. And what I always remember the look on Bilbo Baggins' face in the Fellowship of the Ring, because think of the Hobbit, right? The Hobbit is this grand adventure. Bilbo, the Shire dweller, over-consuming, food eating, beer drinking, fat hobbit that goes out on this great adventure, and it hardens him, and he comes back a new person. But then we see this older version of Bilbo in the Fellowship, and we just see the look on his face. He's in the Shire now. He's not the same person as he used to be before the Hobbit journey, but we see he's looking for the next adventure. He's not happy. He's awake. And when you're awake, you can't return to unconsciousness. You are a hardened man at this point. These things, these whims like beer drinking and cakes and pies and, just like being flamboyant with your buddies and stuff, that, he just couldn't get fully back there, because you just see it in his eyes. He's looking to get away. He's looking for the next adventure. And he's looking to get up to mischief. He's looking to shake things up, because we see Pinocchio return home Pinocchio, and he's waiting, or he's expecting to find Geppetto there, and Geppetto is the voice of conscience that calls you. Well, he's God the Father. Pinocchio's God the Father. But Geppetto is not only that. Geppetto is Pinocchio's protector, and he's no longer home when Pinocchio returns. So what does this mean symbolically? Well, it's that very moment in all of our lives when we realize our parents don't know any more of our problems than we do. And it's terrifying. We get to that point where they can't help us. And it's on you. Pinocchio goes out into the world. Geppetto is the one that pushes him out into the world of the unknown, which is what a good parent does, pushes their child in to go interact with kids your age, go make friends, go interact, go play, go out into the world. You might get hurt, but that's part of the world. And so he pushes him out there, And then Pinocchio stumbles upon psychopaths, he stumbles upon tragedy, and he stumbles upon malevolence, and he stumbles into adventure. And what happens when you stumble into adventure is he grows as a consequence. And there's a point where Pinocchio's like, you know what? I want to return back to my unconscious, safe place at home. And he returns home. Geppetto is not there. It means your protector is not there once you are awakened and once you've transcended much of your childhood ways, once you've matured in your life. That's so unbelievable. To be a new person, you have to venture into the unknown and make habitable order out of chaos. Okay? Geppetto, because Geppetto's missing, he's in the belly of the whale. And what this means is Geppetto degenerated from order into chaos. That's what happens to order that is not constantly being updated. It's like how your parents cling to old ideas throughout their entire lives and refuse to read the new information, the new studies that are emerging. They cling to old ideas. So this Geppetto being in the belly of the whale represents old ideas that need to be resurrected and then need to be resurrected by the new ideas, which is Pinocchio, because Pinocchio is the new generation that's emerging, right? The new generation. And so the death and rebirth motif are those mini psychological deaths we encounter in our lives that are painful, but they shift us in character. They're very, very painful. And Pinocchio is engaging in these little deaths and rebirths. And so one of the big moments is when he actually leaves Pleasure Island. He decides to run away. He awakens. He's like, oh my God, this place that I'm in with these dopey people and drinking and smoking and all of this, being in this amusement park like place. Oh no, I'm regressing. I'm like, what am I doing here? I'm turning into a braying jackass. He makes the conscious decision to jump off into the water. What this means from a Jungian point of view is diving into the unconscious mind, diving into the unknown. What happens when you dive into the unconscious mind? You pull up like fish in the water. You pull up from the depths answers. You pull up the voice of God. God's in the unconscious mind. God is there. And when we turn to Cain and Abel for the real big story of sacrifice. And it's very early on in Genesis. Abel was favored by God due to his offerings of significant value. Significant value. What does this mean? Well, he's giving up his prized possessions. What happens when you give up your Xbox for reading or something physical exercise, or something, well, more difficult? You bear something more difficult. What happens? You're going to develop yourself in character. You're going to grow closer to the transcendent. The victimizer narrative is what Cain adopts. Instead of shaking your fist at the person who is attractive. So what does that mean? You know, Cain is shaking his fist at Abel. Well, Abel's attractive to Cain because otherwise Cain wouldn't give Abel the time of day, right? But there's something about Cain that's, there's something about Abel that's causing Cain to become resentful. And so Cain is struck by something attractive, the success of Abel, something you yourself want. And so this is what lurks in Cain's shadow. Abel is bringing about Cain's inadequacies. Because Cain wants to be favored by God, but being willfully blind, he turns his attention to resentment. He turns it to bitterness. Success in people, whether it's physique, business success, discipline, that'll be a judge. That'll be the judge. And the further away you are from success, the harsher the judge. And so the more insecure you are, the harsher the judge. You'll never see a hater doing better than you. I love that quote. I love that quote. You'll never see a hater doing better than you. So Cain ends up killing his ideal, the thing that is attractive to him, but he's willfully blind. He refuses to admit that. He's not humble enough to fall to his knees and say, I have a lot to learn. Can you teach me? Abel, what are you doing so that God is favoring you? He doesn't. He doesn't. He entertains this dark idea. This idea that, well, if I can get rid of him, then there will be no judge. I will not be exposed the way that I am right now. Is God not the voice of conscience that pulls you towards what's difficult, challenging? Maybe Cain just doesn't want to work as hard. He wants to take the easy way. And Pinocchio is tempted by these two-bit thugs in the movie, the fox and the cat. They literally say, you know, we can have your name in lights, up in lights in no time. You know, you don't need to work hard at all. We'll have you successful in no time, like the Kardashians. No problem. There's no real hard work to be involved, no real talent. And so you take the easy way and it doesn't feel earned. It feels like you cut corners. It feels like you bent the fabric of reality, and certainly it'll snap back in your face. It'll snap. It will. It will get you. And then the call of Abram in Genesis 12. And I love this part of Genesis because the call of Abram is so archetypal. Abram is 75 years old living in his father's tent. It's like this generation now being 30 and living in your mother's basement, right? It's literally, you know, a lot of people now just sit in their rooms, they play video games, they live in comfort. A lot of men, particularly men, don't grow up or having trouble growing up. It used to be, you know, back in the 80s, men would have to grow up before their 20s. Now it's 30s. But anyways, in Genesis 12, the Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." And so there's this voice that calls Abram out into the world. And when he goes out into the world, he encounters suffering, great suffering, but he grows as a consequence. It's the growth. It's the growth. You have to learn how to buttress yourself from suffering, because suffering is always going to be there. And the suffering that is going to accumulate in your father's basement is way worse than the suffering you're going to experience out into the world, because you're just going to end up, well, looking back on your life with so much regret, and it'll be so painful you can't even possibly imagine. And so I want to bring, as we're concluding this podcast, I want to bring it back to the sacrifice of this, well, the significance of Christ's sacrifice, because the cross represents a point of maximal suffering. It's what's below and what's from above meeting and intersecting in the middle, and it represents wholeness, a state of completion of the human soul that comes from psychological awareness, self-knowledge, self-acceptance, wholeness, suffering. Why do we look upon Christ on the cross for knowledge, for wisdom? Why? How do we transcend suffering? Because life is suffering. As soon as you are awakened, when you will be awakened in this life, something will strike you, an illness, not to you, but maybe to a family, maybe accident, maybe just encountering someone on the street that's suffering. Suffering is there, loneliness, something will awaken you. How do you transcend that? And then what's also interesting about Christ's sacrifice is that Jesus did descend into hell after he let go on the cross. He went into hell. And according to Hebrews 13:11-12, while on the cross, he bore an eternity of hell for all the sins of all of his people who would ever live. And so so think about people nowadays who decide to speak up against tyrannical systems. You know, Jordan Peterson, for example, you see articles about him all the time that are, you know, the lefties, really, you know, obviously terrible news article, the news media would try and do what they can to cancel people like Russell Brand, but fail. They fail. But people like him, Peterson said once that he's more afraid of God than he's afraid of God, which means he's more afraid of biting his tongue and his conscience eating him up for not speaking up, not standing up for what's right, truth, not speaking up for truth. And he is willing to put everything on the line for truth. That's it, no question. That's bravery. That's, you know, Christ exposed so much of the tyranny of the state by him being on that cross. We can't help but notice that we can't help but notice the inadequacies of the state. You can't help but notice that. God was shown through Christ. Christ always referred to himself as the Son of Man, Son of God. And God is in everyone, more so in Christ, because Christ lived in accordance to that voice, that higher principle, that the infinite. He was a constant student of the conscience and of these higher principles. That's all. He served these principles. He lived and embodied these principles. And so when he was on the cross, it just, to see someone who least deserves it to be there, it's, well, who crucified him? Well, it's the Romans. Look what they did. It exposed the tyrannical systems. It exposed non-believers. It exposed other people's inadequacies. People didn't like him because he was so real. He was so real. And what's most real in life? Pain, suffering. One who transcends this is most holy, to put everything on the line for the higher truth. And why is the killing of Abel and Christ similar in meaning? Well, you kill the ultimate ideal, and certainly you will be cut off by the knees. So why kill him? So you and your ideas run supreme. That's why. You always wind up as the stagnant old Geppetto without the spirit of exploration and discovery. Higher values must always be above you, as God was with Christ and is above us. What's above us? Higher principles, continual growth and discovery, truth, love. And if you cut that spirit down, what do you worship then? And that's where I'm going to leave you on this podcast episode. Thank you, everyone, for being a listener. Remember, I have a new meditation series every Monday called Meditation Monday. So I hope that you're following along. Let me know what you think of Meditation Monday. Be sure to tune in and so that we can relax, unwind, and be at peace and be present together. I'm excited. I can't wait to join you on the next Meditation Monday. Remember, I have a YouTube channel. Go check out the video podcast there and rise above anxiety. I'll see you next time. My anxiety recovery program is available over at unpluganxiety.com. With the Know Your Brain audiobook, you will learn about the inner workings of your anxiety system. This will help you to better understand why you feel detached and out of control from this ancient brain structure. That's at unpluganxiety.com. Go there to learn more.